It is 6:30 in the morning and I've just woken up to a foul smell and my cat meowing at the front door to come inside. And I let him in and I'm pretty sure he got skunked. Well, the thing is, I'm not 100% sure because he's here. He smells bad. He doesn't smell, it's like it's not his whole body. It's more his head. So I'm wondering if he maybe just like rolled in an area that a skunk had been. I think I did like a very cursory lookup of what to do. And there are a couple different options. And the easiest one is to do a vinegar water mixture. And then after you put your pet in that mixture, after you like rinse them off with that mixture, then you can use like pet shampoo. So I think I'm gonna start with the vinegar water. Hey buddy, you gotta come with me. Yeah, we gotta get you cleaned up. All right, he's been rinsed off and the smell was really quite concentrated on his head. And so now I smelled him and I'm not smelling the skunk smell anymore. I'm mostly, oh my goodness, he looks really rumpled up. I'm smelling mostly the not the hydrogen peroxide, the vinegar solution on him now. No, now that I've just run my hands through him, I am kind of still smelling some skunky smell, but I think I might let him dry. He wants to go back outside too, is part of the problem. I think I'm gonna let him dry and see how he smells, and then we might have to do another round of this. He did not like that very much, but luckily I didn't put him in the water. I kind of just held him close to my body and ran the face cloth over him, and that seemed to be okay, and then I dried him off. All right, now that I'm up because of this whole skunk situation, I may as well get started on some of the tasks that I wanted to do outside today. Some of them can only be done later in the day, but some of them can get started right now. So we may as well get going. The first thing on the list is to go around my kitchen garden, but also our flower garden and plant bed to pick out any weeds that I see growing. Last week, and I wish I'd filmed this because it was such a big drastic change, but our garden, like where our flowers grow, first thing I should mention is it was a garden before we moved into this place. Okay, and as I mentioned, we are renting this house, and part of our like agreement is that we tend to the lawn and to the garden. However, in my mind, I was thinking like, well, like how much should I really tend to something that isn't really mine? But as the summer months, you know, really started to kick in, the weeds were growing in as if we were living in a jungle. So much so that like you could barely see the mulch on the base of the garden anymore. So last week I took like all of half an hour, really. It didn't take all that much effort, but it was daunting a task at hand. I took about half an hour and just pulled out as many weeds as I could, which ended up pretty much being the whole garden. I was able to go through the whole garden. Some of the weeds, most of the weeds I would say I was able to get the roots out, but I couldn't get the roots out on some of them. And so of course they're growing back along their stems. And so each morning, if I should be making the time each morning is what I'm saying, to just do another survey, and maybe there'll be nothing to pull some mornings, but other mornings there may be a few things to pull. So I'm gonna go through our gardens right now and do that. I also am going to bring a bowl out and harvest some more snow peas that I have growing. I also want to pick some rose petals. You may see some petals like right now. This whole bush, this is a large bush that we have in our front yard. Oh, I just noticed Bobby. He's falling asleep sitting up. Yeah, we have this whole like rose bush, and the roses grew so beautifully, and now they're starting to wilt quite a bit, and so I'd like to harvest the petals and use them for a couple different things. The first thing that I had in mind was to make some rose water, kind of like a skin spray. So all that is soaking rose petals in water, and then after you've let the rose petals sit for a while in the water, you separate, like with a colander, you separate the water mixture from the petals, and then you just put them into little spray bottles. Very straightforward. Another thing that I was seeing, there's an influencer that I follow. Her name is Rachel Brathen, and she lives in Sweden. However, she also had roses that were blooming, and so she pulled the petals and put them in her dehydrator, and then once they were dehydrated, she uses them in her teas, her herbal teas. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, that would be a nice way to make some kind of rose tea. And then finally, the last thing that definitely is going to happen today, we are going to add coolant back to our cooling system in the van. And I'll explain much more about this later when we're actually doing the thing. But essentially, we needed to replace the thermostat and the water pump in the van. And now that we've done that, we need to run coolant back through the entire system because we had drained the coolant. Anyways, I've gone on way too long. I think I'm just stalling doing the tasks that I want to do. So let's just get into seeing if there are weeds in the garden to pull. Okay, so it is, I think, just after 9 o'clock, and I've cleaned up the kitchen. So now I feel like I'm ready to collect the rose petals that I want in order to make the rose water that I was talking about, as well as dehydrate some rose petals in order to maybe make tea out of it. And I'm hoping I can try the tea out like right away, because what better way to find out if it worked than trying it as soon as you're done. Okay, we've got the petals in the saucepan with water. I did like just about 2 cups, just underneath I would say, and I ended up doing 4.5 cups of water instead of the 5 that it called for. I have to bring this up to a boil. Once it's boiling, I let it simmer for 20 minutes, and then after it's been simmering for 20 minutes, I then have to just let the water sit off temp for about an hour before using a
before filtering out the water from the petals. All right, I've got my rose petals on the little sheet that's going to go in my dehydrator. I'm going to set that up now. Now, specifically, the recipe that I read, let me get this in here. The recipe that I read said that I want to set the dehydration setting to be as low as possible. So let's see how low I can go. Okay, it looks like 95 is as low as I can go. And I don't know, time, whoa, hours? No. I'm gonna go super low. Oh, 1 hour is the lowest. Okay, well, we're gonna try it out. Let's start. I'm gonna put the light on. Oh! Well, that's not quite what I was hoping for. Oh, they're flying around. I'm just letting these bad boys dry. They were in for 5 minutes, and I didn't want to put my hand in and like scoop around while the oven was still hot. So I'm just letting them sit, and then I'm going to collect them, and I think I'm going to try and make rose tea right away, and then we'll let you know how it goes. Obviously, this looks like it's turned into a mess, but I'm feeling like the results may surprise me in a good way. I don't know if you can tell, but even within a couple of minutes and the water is just on the verge of boiling, you can tell how the color is really leaching from the petals into the water already. So I can imagine when this whole process is done, I feel like the petals are probably going to just be this kind of whitish color, maybe almost gray, and then the water itself is going to be quite pink, I suspect. You know how I said that my rose water would be this lovely pink color? It's green. I just poured the water into this container. I separated the petals and it's green. And so I did a very cursory search on why this is. And apparently if you don't use organic rose petals, that this could potentially happen. All right.
Okay, here. Just watch for me in case I tell you to stop.
Should I still hit the, like, do normal and like hit the gas?
Do normal, whatever, yep.
Stand back. Oh, I'm scared.
You're okay.
Okay, I just wanted to give you a little bit more context as to what's going on with the van and maybe give you a little bit more of an explanation of what we're trying to do. We've had Leroy since January of 2021, and we've had to do quite a number of fixes on him up until this point. But this year specifically, we were looking at fixing up the cooling system. So Leroy overheats quite easily. And in the past, when we've gone on trips with him, if it's a rather hot summer day, or if we are climbing a lot of hills on our journey, he tends to overheat. And we've luckily never gotten to the point where he's dangerously overheated and it actually messes with his system. We've never really had to fix anything related to overheating. However, the act of the van getting super hot was something that we wanted to address this year. So we decided that we would change the water pump in the van as well as change the thermostat. So those are two components that are found within the cooling system. And for all intents and purposes, the change of these pieces, these components, shouldn't have been as hard as they were. However, the configuration of how the engine sits in the van is not like a lot of vehicles these days. There's just a lot of nooks and crannies and a lot of very tight spaces, and getting to the thermostat, you needed to take a lot of components out. Getting to the water pump, you needed to take a lot of other components out. And so Marco had to spend quite a bit of time kind of taking out pieces. And when he got to actually taking out the water pump, the bolts that were holding the water pump together, the head snapped off. So he needed to put a screwdriver through the bolt, which doesn't already have a hole in it. He needed to drill a hole through the bolt and essentially keep using bigger and bigger drill bits to wear away at the rest of the bolt that was still stuck inside the bolt hole. And it's just a very tedious task. And as you get larger and larger in drill bit sizes, you run a greater risk of hitting the threading, which is on the outside of the bolt hole, and ruining the threading. And so that was a big problem that we had to avoid, because if you ruin the threading on the bolt hole, you can't get any other bolts inside. So even if we were able to get the old bolt out, we wouldn't be able to put a new bolt in securely because we all of a sudden didn't have that threading. So anyways, there were 3 or 4 bolts that Marco had to do that with, and that was a very tedious task, but he pulled it off and he did it. And so we were able to install the new water pump. We installed the new thermostat within the thermostat holding, and we put it all together, and we had to drain the coolant from the system before doing all of this. And so we, in putting all the components back together, we needed to actually put more coolant in the system. And so we went to pour coolant back at the end of last week, and the coolant was just dripping all over the place. It was seeping out of the system. And so we took the weekend off. We, figured out a couple of things that maybe we had done wrong initially, and we came back to it yesterday and we fixed a couple things up. We tightened some bolts. We had let one of the components, where the thermostat sits within the thermostat housing, we had put some sealant, and we hadn't let the sealant dry enough the first time around before we put coolant in the system. So we let the sealant fully dry over 24 hours, and that seemed to help with the leaking as well. So we ran coolant through the system a second time, less leaking, but still some leaking. So then we went in and tightened some more bolts, kind of like checked to make sure all the valves were properly connected. And after we did that another time, we pretty much got to the point where it wasn't leaking anymore. So we had pretty much fixed this problem, but part of actually putting coolant back in the cooling system is then at one point you have to turn the van on to actually get the full cycle of coolant cycling through your engine. So up until that point, we had the van off, but then when we went to turn the van on, the cooling system was fine, but all of a sudden our oil wasn't pressurizing. And now I don't fully understand this, and so I'm not going to try and explain too much to you, but it apparently is very dangerous to be running a vehicle that doesn't have pressurized oil system. And so what we were seeing was that the gauge inside the van, when I turned the van on, there's a gauge that is supposed to kind of has like a bar that kind of comes into the normal range, and that bar just wasn't moving at all. And so as soon as I told Marco about this, he says, "Whoa, turn the van off," because it could be a large problem that we're now facing specifically with the oil, which is not at all what we were expecting to happen, of course. It just feels like when one problem gets solved, another one comes up, which is so frustrating. So we've booked in to go see a mechanic, and I have to bring the van tomorrow. Well, I can't drive the van because of this oil situation. So I'm getting the van towed. Luckily, we have CAA, which is like AAA in the United States, but CAA is kind of the same kind of coverage. We have the premium plan, which gives us 5 free tows per year, and we've already used one. A few weeks ago, we had to use it on I guess a couple weeks ago, we had to use it on Marco's car and get it towed in, but now we're gonna get to use it on the van. So I have to call them tomorrow morning and get them to tow it to our local mechanic. And we've already called the mechanic and we've let them know what's up. So hopefully they can give us an idea of what's going on. We don't even live in the van, and there's just constantly things to be working on. And I mean, to that point, we bought a 1987 camper van, and so of course there are components that are going to go kaput because of the age of the vehicle, of course. But I mean, looking at him, his body is like so good. He barely has any rust. Like he's a good van. It's just that we're struggling a little bit with certain things that just need to be replaced. And part of the whole process is the idea that we want to be able to work on the van ourselves to the best of our abilities, but sometimes these kinds of things come up and we can't do it ourselves. We need some external help.